Hey guys, today we're going to be rating video game systems of all generations. Alright guys, thank you for coming in. Just a note, we're only going to be doing the super mainstream ones, otherwise we'll be here all day and I want to keep this list as interesting, nostalgic, and relatable as possible. So we got a total of about a couple dozen, and we'll see how we go with these. If you think I should have included some extras, by all means let me know. Maybe we can do a part 2 sometime. But we are going to start with the Nintendo Switch, everybody. I feel like a lot of people aren't entirely honest about the Nintendo Switch. I'm going to start with the positives. It's got some great Nintendo originals on it. Obviously, like the Zelda games, some Mario games, especially Mario Kart. With that being said, it doesn't run AAA games very well. The Nintendo Switch is like the little engine that could, you know what I mean? And it does the best it can with the limited hardware that it has. I don't think it always hits the mark with games like Mortal Kombat 1 was atrocious, for example. You know, the hardware is very limited by today's standards. With that being said, it's awesome that Nintendo Switch is a hybrid console. You can take it on the go or you can plug it into your TV. But it doesn't have everything going for it. Again, mainly due to the limited hardware. Not that it's not actually a good system. But it's not keeping up with the big guns anymore. Not to mention the fact that I've always found the online store very laggy and annoying to navigate. So it's not perfect. I mean, a lot of people are going to say the Nintendo Switch is the ultimate console. I can't do that. It's a great console, but a flawed console. I'm going to say the Nintendo Switch is actually pretty good. Next, we have another console we got from Nintendo, the Nintendo GameCube. I think this only had like a 5% market share in Australia at the time when PlayStation 2 and Xbox original was around. And such a shame as well, because it runs the same games pretty much just as well, if not better. Also came on those little micro discs, which might have been off-putting for people who were used to like the CD technology at the time, and which is still being used today, whether it's CD or Blu-ray or whatever. But the regular CD-looking things. People are creatures of habit. The Nintendo GameCube had some wonderful games again. Mario Sunshine wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but it was a great Mario game. Mario Kart Double Dash is beloved. Smash Brothers Melee, not to mention all the other triple games on the Nintendo GameCube. Slots for 4 controllers, so you could easily play with your friends, which was always a good time. You know what? Underrated at the time. Massive cult following now. I actually think the GameCube was an amazing console, to be honest. Next, we have the Atari 2600, guys. This is a bit of a double-edged sword to rate, because you can either rate it on its classics like Yars' Revenge, Pitfall, River Raid, or basically all the shovelware or not officially licensed games that came out. And, obviously, unfortunately, it's known a lot for E.T., which is like one of the catalysts for a big decline in gaming. But I guess you have to judge a system on its positives and negatives. It was a wonderful trailblazing system at the time. Had some wonderful arcade ports in the early days, like Space Invaders, Defender, things like that. Later in life, I think the company got complacent and just assumed anyone would buy anything. And so you kind of have to put that into account. Look, the Atari 2600 was, until the early 80s, I'd probably say it's amazing ultimate consoles. By, I guess you could say 1983 was meh or kind of bad. I'm going to put pretty good. I think you need to judge it on the majority of its lifespan. A lot of people forget just how amazing the early Atari actually was and how revolutionary it was to have in your home in the late 70s. Next, we got the Nintendo 64. Geez. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. We have to mention all the classics on this. Mario 64, Zelda Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye. We have to be honest, control scheme-wise, a lot of these games don't hold up as incredibly today as what they did back then. The joystick on this is also very annoying with the D-pad on the side and the analog stick in the middle. I'm glad that's not been replicated since. Not a big fan of the controls. I'm also not a fan of the majority of the early 3D games that have camera angles, which makes playing these games abysmal. I think Conker's Bad Fur Day is one of the most overrated games of all time, to be honest. Look, this system does have a lot of classics, amazing wrestling games as well, me being a pro wrestling fan. A lot of games that you would not go back to today as well. I really, in my humble opinion, I'd probably give the Nintendo 64 a meh rating, but I have to be objective and understand that it did do a lot right, and it was also a pioneer of early 3D games in the home. So I'm going to put it in the pretty good tier, but it's a very low pretty good. It almost goes into the meh category for me. Oh! Next we got the Magnavox Odyssey. I think this came out in 1973, and it was the original home console. Kind of like Pong style, I think. You had these paddles, and you'd move this little... you have these controls, you move this little paddle around on the screen. I think the television actually came with overlays, which would basically give you a different game setting for every time you turn the system on, because it was basically basic paddles. But it was essentially the same game every time, just with a different overlay. Look, an important part of history as far as tech goes. Incredible to have a home gaming console in 1973, like super futuristic. Are you going to go back to the Magnavox Odyssey now? No, it's hot rubbish. No reason to play it today. Which is why I'm not going to give it horrible. I'm going to kind of put it in kind of bad, because it is kind of bad, but it was an important bit of tech back in the day. So ask your mum and dad or even grandparents about this one. They'll tell you some stories. Next, we got the PlayStation 2. Oh, gosh. Again, a lot of wonderful games on PlayStation 2. But there was also a big surgence of shovelware on this system. Just a lot of like cheapy, low license games that were just absolute garbage as well. I like to remember the PlayStation 2 for the classics. You know, the Tekken games, the Metal Gear games, you know, the Resident Evil games. PlayStation 2 did a lot right. They also introduced bigger memory cards so you could do more save backups and stuff. You could play DVDs time and your music and everything, and I always thought the interface for the PlayStation 2 was very good. One of the best-selling consoles of all time as well, and rightfully so. I mean, so many memorable experiences. Final Fantasy X, one of my favorite RPGs of all time. Certainly was a big step up from the PlayStation 1, and most of the games finally came with, if they were open-world experiences, finally came with a controllable camera as well. Important place in history. I'm going to put the PlayStation 2 into the amazing category, and rightfully so. It was a great system. I will say that the PlayStation 2 graphically probably didn't look as good as Xbox original, but the games more than truly made up for it. Next, we got the Nintendo 3DS, which was a step up from the Nintendo DS. A bit more of a gimmick. There was sort of like a 3D resolution where you could, basically images on the top screen would look like they were like in a 2.5D sort of. It's hard to explain. There's a dial you could use on the top screen and you get like 3D, kind of like in a pop-up picture book. The games on 3DS were pretty good, a little bit of a step up. Again, by this point, they were releasing a lot of crap on it as well. But you have to remember such classics as the new Super Mario Bros. 2, for example, and the Pokemon games. Great system to have on the go. Nintendo certainly had brand power. I'm going to put it in the pretty good category. I think there was a lot of crap on the 3DS, but I think there was a lot of classics as well. I still got my 3DS. I don't really have much of a reason to play it anymore now that I have a Switch. But hey, you know what? I pull it out from time to time. And then next we have the DS, the model that came before the 3DS. I think this came out in about 2005, if I'm not mistaken. Was such a revolutionary step up for Nintendo, who were making strides with the Game Boy Advance, but this blew the Game Boy Advance out of the water with the games. You got to see New Super Mario Bros. For the first time. Such a nice looking game. Had classics like Pokemon Heart Gold. And I feel like the games on the DS were a little tiny bit more consistent. So, you know, I'm still going to put this in the pretty good category. I mean, this was out at the same time as the PSP. And I thought the PSP personally blew this out of the water. But Nintendo's not always about revolution. It's about good name brand games like Mario, Zelda, and all that. That's the market they're going for. Look, I think that I'm still going to put that in the pretty good category. Maybe a bit higher in the 3DS, but not high enough to go into the amazing pile. But speaking of amazing, you know what? This is the Game Boy Advance. Came out in the very early 2000s. Nice recovery from Nintendo. I thought the Game Boy Color, which we'll talk about later, was absolute hot garbage. The Game Boy Advance was a step up, kind of like the Switch 20 years ago was a little engine that could. Played a lot of really, really cool games. What did we have? Double Dragon Advance, for example. They had the NES series, so you could go back to the retro library for the first time, which was really cool. Various Pokemon games, Zelda games. And they had the wonderful Super Mario Advance series as well, which was a nice touch. Kind of felt graphically somewhere in between NES and Super Nintendo graphics. But one thing I also loved about the Game Boy Advance was the wonderful colors. It had such a great color palette. The games were always very attractive. Also tried to do fighting games, punching above its weight like Tekken Advance and stuff, which probably won't go and play it by today's standards, but it was still pretty good to have Tekken on the go. I think the Nintendo Color could have potentially ruined Nintendo's handheld console market, and then the Game Boy Advance came out and basically turned things around. I'm going to put the Game Boy Advance into the amazing pile. Also had like this Sonic Advance games, a Crash Bandicoot Advance. It was just a wonderful system. Punched above its weight. I thought it was fantastic. A system that was not fantastic, though, was the Game Boy Color. Couldn't stand the Game Boy Color, man. I mean, it was basically playing the same standard of games as back in the late 80s that the original Game Boy was doing, just with a fresh coat of paint. You would think 11 years on, or 10 years on, I think this came out, what, 99? There would be the technical advance to do even more with games. I mean, even the Game Gear was better than the Game Boy Color, and that came out 10 years beforehand. There are some positives with this unit. I mean, you got Pokemon Gold, I think it was, and, you know, some other games that punched above their weight, like Grand Theft Auto, the Game Boy Edition, which was a nice attempt at doing the original Grand Theft Auto game, but most of the games on this system I thought were hot garbage, just way behind the times, graphically unappealing. I'm going to put the Game Boy Color in the horrible category. And then, speaking of systems that are absolutely amazing, we have the regular Game Boy, the original Game Boy that came out in 1989, I think, with revolutionary games as Super Mario Land, and then you got the amazing sequel, 6 Golden Coins. The Tetris phenomenon, movies about that. Tetris, one of the highest selling games of all time. And look, there was some crap on this system. There are a lot of really good games too. You know, like Batman, Ninja Gaiden, the Mario, Tetris. Pokemon came out in the system originally. There was a lot more going for it than against it. I'm not going to say every game on this system was amazing, but to be able to do this in 1989 and just have such a portable system on the go was amazing. It wasn't too bad on the batteries either. Man, what a revolutionary system. I mean, I'm going to put the original Game Boy in the amazing pile. I think it certainly deserves it. Oh! It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. We've got the Nintendo Entertainment System, the phenomenon that is responsible for Super Mario Brothers. Oh my gosh, all those black box games and the original Legend of Zelda, Mario 3. Oh gosh, I mean, look, you can forgive this console for having the occasional crap LJN game or the crap Ocean game, because the vast majority of the games in this system were awesome. The Zeldas, the Mega Mans, Metroid, Punch-Out, you name it, Double Dragons, except for maybe number 3, but I digress. Man, this system was just the business. Castlevania has to have a mention, Kid Icarus. Oh my gosh, so DuckTales, so many 5-star games on this system, and plenty of them, and enough that I can put the Nintendo NES into the ultimate consoles. What it did to finally bring a home entertainment system. Oh man, amazing. Amazing job, Nintendo. Amazing job. Basically saved the video game industry. Next we have the Nintendo Switch. And I remember Rich from Review Tech said this perfectly once. It's the world's most expensive beer coaster. Because I think most people bought the Nintendo Nintendo Wii, sorry. Forgive me, to play Wii Sports and do the 10-pin bowling. And I think once everyone got over the 10-pin bowling phenomenon, a lot of Wii units collected dust, which is a real shame because there were a lot of really good games on this system as well. like Mario Kart. My favorite version of Mario Kart is actually the Wii version of Mario Kart. All those tracks are now on Mario Kart 8 Deluxe now, which is great. At least my favorites anyway. Some good Zelda games on here. You had the Mario Galaxy games. However, you also had a lot of crappy gimmicky games that didn't make great use of the motion controllers, which was a nice gimmick at the time, but the technology wasn't quite there for it to be 100% accurate. You had, the remote and the nunchucks and stuff. Thankfully, you could still play this with Pro controllers as well. And I think the original Nintendo Wii model also played GameCube games, which was a nice touch. It's a good system, but a mixture of good games and a mixture of shovelware. I'm going to put the Nintendo Wii into the pretty good category, because it is pretty good, but I can't give it any higher than that. And next, look, we got the Wii U next. One of the most unsuccessful Nintendo consoles ever, but don't confuse that with this being a bad system. It certainly wasn't. It was a step up. You could still use your motion controls on this, or you could do the big... and it had this big, thick tablet-type controller, which is a nice touch. I'm not going to lie. It was cool to be able to have a touchscreen and also a controller all in one. But it was a little bit clunky and bulky for the time. However, look, you know what? I got to kudos to Nintendo, even though they, majorly failed with this console. At least they tried something new. Terribly marketed, but some pretty good games. Like, you had a Hyrule Warriors on it. Again, you had Zelda experiences on here. Super Mario 3D Land, I think it was. Mario Deluxe originally came out on this. So it did have good games. Not as many games as a lot of other consoles. But most of the games I've played on the Wii U, to be honest, were pretty good. And I liked that they also played the Nintendo Wii games in a slightly upscaled revolution. Look, even though this system failed, it had a lot going for it. I really, really liked the Wii U. And I'm going to put it in the pretty good category. If you disagree or agree, by all means, let me know in the comments down below. That's what it's there for. But I do think the Wii U, poorly marketed, but very underrated. Next, we got the PlayStation 3. See, I have to try and take my bias out here because the PlayStation 3 got me through some very hard times with my job and a breakup and everything. I literally locked myself in my bedroom for a couple months when I first got my PlayStation 3. Pretty late, mind you. Late 2010, early 2011 I got it. So very late. I was playing PlayStation 2 until then. But it got me through a really hard time playing some Call of Duty Black Ops, Knockout Kings, and some other games. Dante's Inferno. Look, this generation had some wonderful games. Only real complaint I had about the PlayStation 3 is, technically speaking, they were very unreliable. It didn't matter if you had the slim model or you had the fat model. They'd always seem to have some kind of issues or technical problem with the system themselves. So it has to kind of lose points for that. But for the most part, the games are all very good. I never, a lot of, PlayStation 3 had a really big library, guys. But I don't remember there being too much shovelware on this system. I'm not going to say that there wasn't some bad games on it, but so many wonderful experiences on this system. You know what? I'm going to put the PlayStation 3 in the pretty good category. I probably would have even put it higher, but just wasn't such a massive step up from the PlayStation 2, apart from a few, revolutionary, graphic revolution changes. But not a massive leap, I don't think. But it was still a fun system with great games. And speaking of PlayStation systems, again we have the PlayStation 4. I think this was a really big, gigantic leap. I felt like for the first time with the PlayStation 4, we almost matched the console experience in the home on your couch. I still feel like the PlayStation 3 had console experiences on it, but I felt like graphically it was just such a big downgrade in comparison. By the PlayStation 4 era, you didn't really notice too much of a difference. And it was wonderful just to have such high-powered games in the home. Whether you're playing things like Destiny, just to name an example. It was just wonderful to have that high-definition experience on your couch at a relatively reasonable price compared to a PC as well. Lots of great games. I think this was actually, until the Nintendo Switch came along, I think this became the highest selling console of all time, and deservedly so. I was actually going to put it in the Ultimate Consoles, but I think the PlayStation 4 did have a few technical issues with the fans and stuff, which made it a little bit unreliable at times. But the games are, for the most part, are absolutely wonderful. They're still selling PlayStation 4 games today. It's been out since, end of 2013, so it's 10 years now. So fantastic. You know, I'm going to put the PlayStation 4 into the amazing tier. Next, we got the PlayStation Vita. I think the biggest issue, again, was the fact that it flopped. It didn't have that many games for it. But the games I did play on it were pretty fun. Like, I played my friends, and I played Formula 1, and having, Formula 1 on the go and these big, I guess you could say, experiences in the handheld were pretty good. I don't know, maybe the world just wasn't ready for it at the time. Not a lot of memorable games on it for me, although I will admit I'm not massively experienced with the PlayStation Vita. I just felt like at the time the PSP that came out maybe about 10 years beforehand was a lot more revolutionary and had a majorly bigger library. I'm probably going to put the Vita in the meh category. It wasn't that it wasn't bad, but it was marketed poorly, didn't succeed, didn't have a lot of great games on it. Next we got the Sega Dreamcast. Oh boy. You know what, the Sega Dreamcast, Sega was always good at bringing the arcade to your home. I mean, you had Real Bass Fishing on this, you know, House of the Dead, Dynamite Cop, and then you also had, like, the proper Sega console experiences, like Sonic Adventure and stuff, some, Shenmue. The world wasn't quite ready for it yet, but a big open world experience that was ahead of its time. Came out in the late 90s. Games for the late 90s on this looked absolutely amazing. This was like a PlayStation 2/Xbox experience 2 years before they even came out. The games were absolutely wonderful to look at. I actually preferred to play Code Veronica on the Dreamcast over the PlayStation 2. And there was also a game called Tokyo Highway Battle, aka Tokyo Extreme Racer. Always felt like that looked better on the Dreamcast than it did on the PlayStation. Punched above its weight. I don't necessarily know to this day why the Dreamcast failed. It was around for 18 months and then it was gone. I wish I kept my whole collection. But had a lot of wonderful games on this. The fishing rod, the light gun. I will say my only complaint for this console is some games probably didn't have a lot of depth. I mean, there were RPGs on this and stuff, but there were also a lot of arcade experiences that, being what they were and paying a full price point for them, it probably would have left a bit of a bad taste in your mouth. Thankfully, not too many horrible games on this, but a big technical innovation. I'm going to put the Dreamcast into the pretty good category. It's one of my favorite consoles. I recommend you go back and check out the library in your travels. Oh, guys, we have the Seager Genesis this time. Oh, the 16-bit system that came out in late 1988, early 1989, got bundled with Altered Beast. Over the years, it'd get bundled with many other games like Sonic, Aladdin, depending on your country. Oh, man. I mean, look. Got overshadowed a couple years later a little bit by Super Nintendo, but keep in mind the hardware in this thing was over 2 years older. Had everything, guys. It had platforming games. It had RPG games. Amazing racing games, amazing arcade games. First console that actually brought really good arcade ports to the home. They weren't perfect, but it was the first time an arcade game still looks like the arcade game on a home console. And yeah, wonderful system. What was really annoying about this system, though, is with the exception of really good games like Streets of Rage and stuff, which had phenomenal soundtracks, you'd always get that annoying guitar string sound effect on this console, which seemed to be like trademark for the Sega Genesis, aka Sega Mega Drive. Amazing console though, more really, really good games than bad games. I'm going to put the Sega Genesis in the amazing tier. Now, here is a console a lot of my North American friends don't know about, but my friends in the UK, Europe, Brazil, and Australia, this probably had not much less market share than the Nintendo NES. This was the Sega Master System. Came in two models. Came in the first model here, which had like a separate card slot for the more primitive games back in the time. Had a built-in style game, most of them. And then the Master System 2, which had Alex Kidd and Miracle World mainly built in. Sometimes it was other games. But yeah, the 8-bit Sega console was the first time that arcade games were being brought to the home. Well, that's not true. Atari did, but I guess you could say Seager arcades. The first time Seager arcade games were being brought to home. Things like Outrun, Afterburner, not Burger, Double Dragon, things like that. Look, they didn't look like their arcade counterparts, I'll admit, but Sega did their own thing with them at the time. And look, sometimes the Sega Master System punched above its weight. With games like Wonder Boy, looked very similar to the arcade version. Same with Wonder Boy and Monsterland. It's a good little system. I do feel like the majority of the games on NES are much more memorable. There are a lot of really good games on Sega Master System, but there was also a lot of trash on it too. I can't deny that. Although classics like Wonder Boy, Dragon's Trap, this version of Sonic on Master System is incredibly underrated. It's very good as well. It's a good system. A lot of people love R-Type on the Master System as well. Look, I'm going to put that in the pretty good category. I absolutely love the Master System, but I also understand it doesn't deserve to go into the amazing tier. Next, we got the Sega Saturn. Basically, the console that would do everything that the PlayStation 1 would do, but much slower, and also at a higher price point. Meh. But look, it did have some okay Sega originals on it, and people still love to collect imports for this system. And look, the games were good. There was just no real point to have one when PlayStation played most of the same games with a higher performance, like Tomb Raider and stuff at the time. A game worth having if you wanted the Sega originals, like Sega Rally, Daytona USA, for example. Otherwise, meh. We're going to put the Sega Saturn in the meh pile. Next, we got the SG-1000. I don't know if this came out in the West. I know this came out in Japan. This was Sega's first home console. The Sega Master System, I think, was called the SG-3000 in Japan. So this was the 1000. It was kind of like the equivalent of playing like black box games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. You know, those really old school single screen arcade game experiences? They don't really hold up great now. Some of them are fun to play. Very primitive Sega system. Yeah, look, the games were perfectly fine. Not that interesting and nothing really classic on it. We're going to put the SG-1000 into the meh category. Oh, guys. Now we have the Super Nintendo. Oh, gosh. People might be torn on my opinion on this. Super Nintendo was fantastic. Improved on everything on the Seager Genesis. While the Seager Genesis had a bit more of a guitar stringy soundtrack, I love the techno soundtracks with the kick drums on a lot of these Super Nintendo games. Basically revolutionized the RPG experience with games like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 6/3, depending on your region. Brought Mario Kart, Star Wing. I do argue that those FX games don't hold up well today, but they were amazing at the time. You know, you had the parallax scrolling or whatever you call it, so you had games that came out around launch, like Super Castlevania with amazing effects. F-Zero. You had Zelda, Link to the Past. It was such a classic console. Let's not pretend that there wasn't a lot of garbage licensed platformers and other games on this as well. Super Nintendo had some hot garbage, so you did have to be vigilant and make sure you didn't get sucked into buying a bad game on Super Nintendo. Thankfully, all the all-time classics of all genres more than made up for it. The fact that Super Nintendo did have some shovelware on it, that's what I call crappy games. I'm not gonna put it in the ultimate consoles, but I'm gonna put it in the amazing category. I know some RPG fans are probably gonna be really pissed off that I didn't put it in the ultimate console section, but it's an amazing console that certainly had some flaws. So, not to say that the NES as well in the amazing console didn't have some flaws, but the NES was just such a massive revolution, and so was the Super Nintendo, but maybe just not as much as what the NES was for me. Oh, gosh, okay. PlayStation 1. Alright, PlayStation 1. Okay. Revolutionized 3D into the home. Kind of like, well, I mean, you had 3DO and you had Sega CD and all that beforehand, but PlayStation was the era where it finally got things right with some amazing 3D experiences like Metal Gear Solid, Crash Bandicoot, amazing games. Was one of obviously the pioneers of early 3D in the home. So there was a lot of shovelware 3D experiences on this as well. But overall, the classics on this system outweigh the bad games. As I said, Metal Gear, Final Fantasy VII, just to name a couple. Some amazing games. And you know what? The developers behind these games weren't afraid to do the occasional 2D game as well, like Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I liked that they just wanted to bring out good games on this system, no matter what they looked like. You know what? As I said, there is a lot of crap on the PlayStation 1, just like the Super Nintendo, that you have to avoid. But you can't argue with how many classics are on this system. Which, you know, people will still play like Tekken 3 and Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII even today, and that has to account for something. So I'm going to put the original PlayStation into the amazing category. Now we got the Xbox 360. Jeez, man, Xbox 360 did a lot right. Similar game library to the PlayStation 3, but also a lot wrong. I mean, this was a little bit older technology too. I think it originally came out late 2005 or 2006. So, yeah, it came out pretty soon after the original Xbox, come to think of it. That was only out for a few years before we got the Xbox 360. It was a big technology upgrade, though. Unfortunately, you would be famous for like the Red Ring of Death and a lot of other technical issues. What also annoyed me is the disc trays on the Xbox early models would always get jammed as well. So there was just countless problems with this system. Not to mention a lot of games that came on one disc on PlayStation 3 would come on two discs in the Xbox. Xbox Live Service, however, was always a wonderful thing. And, I mean, you can't beat games like Halo and Gears of War. They're incredible. I'm not going to take anything away from those type of games. My criticisms of the Xbox is mainly on the hardware itself. It was just incredibly unreliable and got dated pretty quick. And so, I'm not being critical of the games, but there was just so many hardware problems with the Xbox 360. I have to put it on the meh category. As I said, not being critical on the games as much as the unit itself. You don't want to have to replace it every couple years because something messes up. Now we got the Xbox One. Look, I'm not massively experienced with the Xbox One, but a lot more sturdy than the Xbox 360. I think the Xbox One could survive a nuclear bomb. Just like the PlayStation 4, big upgrade in game resolution. And kind of acted like a home entertainment system as well. Really, really neat. Definitely not the same fanfare as the PlayStation 4, but a very respectable console with a similar library. And then you've also got the Xbox originals as well. I'm going to put the Xbox into the pretty good category, Xbox One. Next we have the Xbox original. And, oh my gosh, this thing was so freaking heavy and had really bulky controllers. But if you could get past that, some wonderful games like Project Gotham Racing and Fable. And, I mean, I'm just trying to remember them all right now. Unreal Championship, AMPS, the snowboarding game. Had a lot of the same games as the PlayStation 2, but some originals as well. Wasn't as popular as the PlayStation 2, but in some ways it was better, actually. I felt like the games looked and ran a little bit better sometimes. And you could even, it actually came with its own hard drive, which I thought was neat too. And so you could play your own soundtracks as a background music in your favorite games, which I loved. And what else? Yeah, I mean, it was a great system to mod too, although you can't really judge it by that. Oh, look, I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me, but I actually thought the Xbox original was amazing. Now, guys, I didn't rate the PlayStation 5 or the new Xbox Series S today, but we can maybe do that in a future video. We're just going up to the last generation. Now, we got this console here. I already did the PlayStation Vita. Does anyone remember what this one is? Because I can't recognize it by the picture. If you can recognize this one, let me know in the comments. But I'm just going to leave that one down there for now. But guys, thank you for watching my console tier list today. If you have any other opinions, please let me know below in the comments. And if you'd like to see another type of video like this, by all means, let me know as well. And we'll catch you in the next video, guys. Have yourselves a great day.